Forza Horizon 5 allows you to share tuning setups, which can be discovered and downloaded by anyone in the game. Unfortunately, these tunes are sorted by the most downloaded, which usually results in top tunes being absolute garbage. Previously, we have tested tunes from some of the most popular tuners in the game. Some were disappointing, and some were actually good. But what about everyone else? 99% of the shared tunes are unlikely to be downloaded by anyone, regardless of how good they are. So here, I have over 60 obscure tunes that were collected from the comment section in the previous video. The first 4 tunes will be looked at extensively by multiple players. Let's begin. First up, we have this S2 class tune for AMG 1 made by McCoy. This car features lots of downforce, but unlike most S2 cars, it's not adjustable, and combined with stiff tuning settings, it's made this tune understeery and unresponsive for most people. The stiff suspension settings also meant that you had less stability over bumps. To find out how much of these issues were related to the tune, we all installed the same parts and upgrades as the original tune and then applied our own tuning settings. As it turns out, this car does not have much tuning potential, but there are still plenty of improvements to be made. Most of us use softer and more oversteery settings, which made the car more responsive and more consistent at the same time. On average, everyone managed to improve their fastest lap time by over 0.4 of a second around our track. The average lap time was improved even more thanks to the much needed stability improvements. We then tried to see if we could improve it further by changing the parts and upgrades, but the car was nearly maxed out already and there wasn't much to change. And that was it for this tune. Every tester can give tunes a score out of 5, and the average score for this tune was 2.8 out of 5. We then have this S1 class road tune for the F1 made by Killian. This tune is rear-wheel drive, features drift tyres and over 1000 horsepower. This type of build is known as a power build, which requires precise throttle inputs in order to drive properly. Most power builds are extremely easy to slide and lose control with, but not this one. You still need good throttle control, but this tune hardly turns at mid to high speed corners, let alone slide. The tuning settings were relatively stiff and way too understeery, so it should go without saying that everyone tuned the car for more oversteer, some more than others. Our changes had a notable impact on our lap times. On average, we improved by around 0.7 of a second. Now it's time to change the upgrades, and there are many options. You could either optimize the current build even further, or switch to a more grippy tyre compound in exchange for horsepower. You can also entirely ditch the build and go for all-wheel drive. Most of these new builds are more consistent and easier to drive, but not necessarily faster. Drivers with faster lap times managed to go slightly faster, while others actually got worse, but more consistent with their less powerful builds. In the end, the upgraded choices on the original tune were fairly good, but no one found success with its understeery tuning settings. The average rating for this tune is 3.3 out of 5. Next, we have an S1 class road tune for the new R35 made by Moonlight. This tune features a way below average power to weight ratio, but it features slick tyres and a wide body kit, so we should expect it to handle really good, right? For some reason, this tune was extremely unresponsive and just didn't grip. And when you look at the top speed, it becomes clear why. This tune features minimum downforce, which is the exact opposite of what you are supposed to do for a race build, especially in this game. This tune uses an understeery differential settings, which made it bad in low speed corners as well. You can fix this tune by simply raising the downforce, which makes you a lot faster in the corners while barely affecting your straight line speed. The lap times being improved by over a second speak for themselves. You can make this tune even faster for most Horizon tracks by downgrading to rally tyres and adding more power. This way, you make the car much faster on anything that isn't a full handling circuit. On our fairly balanced track, this resulted in another second of improvement in lap times. In the end, the build on the original tune maybe had some potential, but the downforce was just not there. The average rating for this tune is 1.5 out of 5. Next, we have another S1 class road tune for another R35 made by Enax. We already tested a disappointing tune from Nalek for this car, and this tune looks to be another, and here's the reason. Sport tyres cost about the same amount of performance points as rally tyres, but they are worse in pretty much every way. These tyres also tend to understeer and lock up a lot, which was the biggest issue with this tune. Another issue with this tune was an extremely long second gear, which was annoying coming out of low speed corners. We then attempted to fix this tune by applying more oversteery settings and a shorter second gear, but that barely helped. In fact, the settings on the original tune were already leaning towards oversteer, and we only managed to make small improvements compared to our previous lap times. We then changed the build by switching to rally tyres. To no one's surprise, this new build was noticeably faster. This is the first time that we see a tune with good settings and a bad build. According to the original tuner, the rally tyres were too slidey, which is true if we compare them to sport tyres, but they are just more efficient, and sport tyres are way too understeery by default. Anyways, the average rating for this tune is 3.6 out of 5. So far, the tunes we have looked at were either average or underwhelming, which doesn't sound good, but it still means that literally downloading a random tune is likely to end up better than a tune from the third most popular race tuner in the game. Or most of the top seasonal tuners really. Unfortunately, no one is crazy enough to go through the remaining 60 tunes. Except me, of course. I ran a few laps with every other tune on the list and compared them to an optimal meta tune. The ratings are based on how much better or worse the car could be. These tests are nowhere near as thorough and accurate as the previous ones, but it's the best that could be done in a reasonable amount of time. It is also worth noting that a lot of people on this list are not experienced tuners, and to keep it short, I will most likely highlight the negatives as opposed to the positives. Let's begin. First up, we have Extreme E. Despite what the title says, this is actually one of the slowest off-roaders for A class. There isn't really much you can do to this car. The tune is a bit bouncy and needs more rebound. The gear is only long enough for dirt tracks, and the diff is understeery, 4 out of 10. Next, a Subaru. It says handling, but it's actually a nice balanced build. Upgrade choices are great, but it doesn't need race clutch, transmission, brakes and roll cage. Tuning settings are stiff, but very responsive. Differential is the biggest problem, which is way too understeery in low speed corners, 6 out of 10. Next, we have this Dirt Evo. This tune features one of the least efficient engine swaps in the game, which is the inline 4-turbo Rally. It also features race brakes, but otherwise, the upgrade choices are okay. This car is understeery, but manageable. The biggest issue is the suspension, which is unbalanced and all over the place, 4 out of 10. Next tune, Link & Co Touring Car, which uses an optimal front-wheel drive drag tyre build for S1 class. The tuning settings, however, are just not good. Being stiff and understeery is the smallest issue. The main problem is lowered front aero and increased rear aero, which is the opposite of what you want in a front-wheel drive car. Sure, it's more stable than the Meta tune, but it's certainly not worth being second slower, 3 out of 10. Next, we have this Mate, which is too heavy, underpowered and doesn't have enough grip for S1. And it gets worse when you drive it. This tune is extremely stiff and unstable. Going over any bump will set your car off. It is slow and understeery at mid to high speed corners. This tune has lots of useless upgrades and could use slick tyres, 1 out of 10. Next, we have this 911, which is another underpowered tune that doesn't handle well. It just understeers and not much else. Rally tyres, weight reduction and front aero would make this tune faster on both straights and corners, 2 out of 10. Next, a Freewheeler, which is one of the worst dirt cars in B class. The car feels fine, except for the long 6 gear, but you also have to consider that there isn't really much you can change on this car. You can still go for a lighter build with a better power to weight ratio, 6 out of 10. Next, this Volvo wagon, which is powerful, but it's heavy and features drag tyres. The car actually handles well for the build it is on. The gears are all over the place, but aside from that, you can't do much to improve this tune. However, no matter how you tune this build, it's not going to keep up with other A-class cars. This car will serve better as a 2-wheel drive power build with better tyres, more power and less weight, 6 out of 10. Next, a Purist Subaru, which is so far the best tune. It could use a more centered differential, as it is slightly oversteery at low speed corners, and the sport suspension is way too stiff and not optimal. Otherwise, it's a great tune with balanced power and grip for online, 8 out of 10. Next, a Noble, with a below average power to weight ratio, and sport tyres, which we already know why it's not a good choice. This car has lots of downforce by default, which carries this tune to some extent, but it is still understeery, 3 out of 10. Next, this R31, which is so slow that you will fall asleep behind the wheel. Seriously, even full handling builds have more acceleration. The handling is good and rally tyres carry the car, but it is barely faster than C-class cars on anything that isn't a full handling track. This car has plenty of handling already. You can use street tyres and still keep it on the handling side, 2 out of 10. Next, this Range Rover. It has the same weight and 200 less horsepower than the Meta build I already have installed. But does it really handle better? Well, barely, and it's not worth it. Every underpowered car with lots of grip will feel good to drive regardless of tuning, and this tune was no exception. But in terms of lap times, you are literally turning one of the best B-Class off-roaders into something barely faster than a Morgan three-wheeler. Even a full handling track won't save you in this case. 2 out of 10. Next, a purist Ferrari, and it is great. The handling is balanced with a small amount of manageable oversteer. The upgrade choices are optimized and you can't really make a better purist build. It is slightly twitchy and unstable over bumps, but not by much. 9 out of 10. Next, an F1 GT. Another unresponsive high downforce car, which this tune has attempted to correct with overly stiff settings, and it works well for low to mid-speed corners, but it could have been better at higher speeds with less camber and decel. The build is also fairly optimized. If you are looking for an easy to drive F1 GT with race brakes, this tune is a great option. 8 out of 10. Next, this Elise, which is supposed to be a dirt tune aimed more towards grip, but for that to happen, it should have used front aero instead of race brakes. This tune is understeery, but you will have no issue sliding on dirt as the suspension is extremely unstable and bouncy. 3 out of 10. Next up, another F1 GT. This time for S2 class, and it is nearly a power build despite being titled grip. This tune drives nicely, and it is fairly responsive at low to mid-speed corners. At higher speeds, however, this tune is unstable, and too little rear aero makes it underperform. The upgrades are good, but a better grip build would feature slick tyres instead of race transmission and roll cage. 7 out of 10. Next, a Centenario, which is another high downforce car, and despite having installed full width race tyres, it understeers horribly at lower speeds, which is caused by bad suspension and diff setup. It is also too heavy and should have used more weight reduction. 3 out of 10. Next, an RX-7. Not the car you usually see for S1 class dirt. It is nearly maxed out with off-road tyres, but you can still fit more power in. The damping is too soft and bottoms out frequently, but it is still better than any dirt tune we tried so far. The gears are all over the place and not long enough for some of the dirt tracks. 5 out of 10. Next, a Shelby Daytona. I expected this tune to underperform due to having no aero, but it is actually really good. The car is extremely balanced and responsive, and the upgrade choices are almost fully optimized. It is still disappointing in high-speed corners, but that is expected. If you are looking for a no aero build, this tune is a great option. 9 out of 10. Next, a rear-wheel drive grip build for the 240SX. For the most part, the tuning is fairly balanced, but it is too slow and many upgrade choices make the tuning pointless. Most importantly, this tune uses maximum front tyre width, but you don't have enough rear grip in the first place to accommodate your front tyres. 3 out of 10. Next, a Camaro, which has been downgraded to A-Class using drag tyres. The handling is actually really balanced with a small lean towards understeer. The upgrades are okay, but it could use less weight and power. 7 out of 10. Next, a Z4, and looks like we are back to tunes with excessive amounts of understeer and stiffness. This tune has no aero, so don't even get me started on high-speed cornering. The upgrade choices on this tune are average. If you really want to keep the stock look, switching to slick tyres is a better option. 3 out of 10. Next, this Aston, which is nicely balanced and stable. I only really found small issues with this car, such as gears and being slightly unresponsive at higher speeds. 9 out of 10. Next, this NSX, which is slightly twitchy, but it is totally manageable and mostly balanced. It is underpowered for its class, but for a grip build, it's mostly fine. 8 out of 10. Next, another Subaru, and this time for dirt. There are small problems such as slight understeer at low and high speed, stock suspension being a bit bouncy and short gears, but it's mostly okay. The build is also optimized for its engine it's using. 8 out of 10. Next up, a dirt Caterham. The bump settings is too soft and suspension bottoms out frequently. The diff seems to be understeery and final gears are too long. The upgrade choices are good except for the front tyre. 4 out of 10. Next, an off-road CC8S. This tune has gotten everything wrong, starting with rally tyres, which should never be used for rally racing because this is Forza. Upgrades are poorly chosen and tuning is horrible. 0 out of 10. Next, a dirt Monero. This car is nicely balanced and the suspension handles the bumps nicely. The only problem is that it is difficult to make this car slide, so it could use more oversteering camber and anti-roll bars. The build is mostly optimized, but you can still fit more power. 7 out of 10. Next, a dirt LFA. The suspension on this car is too stiff and it would have been a big problem if this car wasn't so slow, but you can't really make it faster in A-Class either, even by changing the parts. 8 out of 10. Next, a Purist Javelin. It locks up a lot and is slightly on the oversteery side, but it is totally manageable. Although, it could use an adjustable suspension to make it less floaty and more stable. The build is on the grippier side and could use more power, but it is great for what it is. 8 out of 10. Next, an RS200 focused on grip. But is it really worth over 200 less horsepower than the mated build? Well, not really. The added grip is not much, and you'll end up being slower on most tracks. The suspension on this tune is bouncy, but the downforce can mostly keep it on the ground. The gears get longer for some reason, and roll bars are too soft and inside tyres lose too much grip. 4 out of 10. Next, a Viper, which is titled Grip, but for that to happen, you would need front aero and weight reduction instead. The gears are short, diff is understeery, and suspension is too stiff, but fairly responsive. 5 out of 10. Next, a Dirt Corvette, which is way too heavy. You can get nearly the same amount of horsepower, but with 200 kilos less weight. The suspension on this tune is unstable and bouncy, especially in the rear, and that is not held by the lowered aero. 3 out of 10. Next up, a 911, which somehow has less power and less grip than the Mater tune, and it gets worse when you drive it. This tune is extremely stiff, understeery, and unstable. 1 out of 10. Next, a Dirt Audi, which is a bit understeery, especially at higher speeds. The suspension is a bit stiff, but manageable. The upgrades are good, but you can still fit a bit more power. 7 out of 10. Next, a Purist Civic, which barely provides enough handling for A-Class, and the understeery sports suspension does not make it any better. The build is mostly good though, and there are not many options to make it better without aero. 7 out of 10. Next up, we have another Purist Civic. I refuse to believe that this tune has taken a month to make, as it is still way too understeery. The upgrades are average and you can fit more power and slick tyres. 4 out of 10. Next, a 911, which is mostly balanced, but it's too low and the diff makes it understeery in low speed corners. The upgrade choices are great, but it could use a more efficient engine swap. 7 out of 10. Next, a Camaro, which is extremely stiff and responsive, but there is not enough rear grip to support it. Removing front tyre width and roll cage will open up room for wider rear tyres and around 100 more horsepower. 4 out of 10. Next, a Ford Coupe, which doesn't really work for off-road, so I'll use it on-road. This car is understeery, most of which comes from suspension being too soft that your rear inside wheels nearly lift off the ground. The upgrades are about average and you can fit around 50 more horsepower just by using a centrifugal supercharger. 4 out of 10. Next, another Centenario, which is too heavy just like the previous one, but this time at least, the car actually turns and is very responsive. The gears, however, are all over the place. 6 out of 10. Next, another Ferrari. This is another great tune with optimized parts and balanced tuning, with more focus towards power and oversteer. The car is responsive, but it could use more rotation with more aggressive camber and roll bars. 9 out of 10. Next, a Starion, and this tune has every inefficient upgrade imaginable. The tuning is stiff, with no attention to rear grip. 2 out of 10. Next, a 911, which is good, but there is some understeer at low and high speed corners. It could use a softer and higher suspension and more front aero. The build is good, but there is still room for wider rear tyres. 7 out of 10. Next, a Purist Prelude, which is really slow, but handles nicely. Open diff combined with drift tyres makes this car easily lose traction and understeer at low speed corners. Rally tyres would have been a better option. 5 out of 10. Next, a Purist 911. This tune is great. It is extremely balanced, stable and responsive. The only problem is that it is underpowered. This car has lots of handling by default and rally tyres would have been sufficient. For a full grip build, slick tyres would have been a better choice. 9 out of 10. Next, another Civic, which you shouldn't really take to S1 class, and even if you wanted to, you should at least use slick tyres, weight reduction and turn up the aero. This tune has done none of it and drives horrible. 1 out of 10. Next, a Corvette. This tune features front aero only. Combined with bad tuning settings, it results into something that is twitchy, unresponsive, unstable and understeery all at the same time. 1 out of 10. Next, a F50, which for a rear-wheel drive S2 car is highly stiff and understeery. The biggest problem with this tune is the lack of mid to high speed handling. Lowering downforce is not something you do on a car class entirely dependent on downforce. 2 out of 10. Next, another Purist Civic, and this is the best one so far. It handles great and is highly optimized for a grip build. You can get a bit more out of this car with an adjustable suspension, but not much else. 9 out of 10. Next, another 911, and once again, with less power and less grip compared to the Mater tune. The similarities don't end there, and this tune is also extremely understeery, but at least it's a lot more stable. 2 out of 10. Next, an Enzo. This tune is near perfect. It is extremely responsive and handles great at every corner. The build is optimized for having stock engine, but there is no need for roll cage. 9 out of 10. Next, another 240SX, which is very similar to the previous one, but this time, the tune is so understeery that you don't even get to use the available grip. Another 3 out of 10. Next, a Purist 240SX, brought to you by the person voicing over this video. He's been tuning this car since the launch of this game, and it looks like it has paid off. It is a nicely optimized Purist build with relatively soft and stable settings. It works great at all speeds, but it could use more rotation at lower speeds with softer front roll bars and higher ride height. 10 might be too biased, so I'll give it a 9 out of 10. Next, a Dirt Countach, which is a bit stiff and understeery, but the car is too slow and heavy for that to matter much, and the upgrade choices are inefficient. 4 out of 10. Next, a Dirt Cobra. The suspension is mostly stable, but it is understeery, especially at higher speeds. As for the upgrades, you can basically get same grip and more acceleration by removing brakes and front tire to get front aero and more power. 5 out of 10. Next, an MR2, which despite being rear-wheel drive and having full front tire width, is highly stiff and understeery, especially at low-speed corners. The build is unoptimized, and you don't need race brakes on an underpowered B-Class car, or any car really. 3 out of 10. Next, another Rised Up Civic, which is another overly stiff and understeery tune. If you don't want to use Forza Aero, you should at least use slick tires and weight reduction because this just doesn't turn. 2 out of 10. Next, another Subaru, which is a bit stiff and bouncy, but it is manageable and responsive. The upgrade choices are good, but still can be optimized a bit further. 8 out of 10. Next, the Forza Edition Morris, which is a difficult car to drive, and this tune was no exception, but if you can drive it, it is actually really good. You can make it more stable by using less Diff XL, tyre pressure, and more front roll bars, but I couldn't make any notable improvements by tuning this car, so 10 out of 10. Wait a minute, the car is on heaviest rims by default. You didn't have to ruin it with these. 0 out of 10. Next, another RX-7. Everything from diff, suspension and aero makes this car understeer hell at all speeds. The upgrades are better, but it could use weight reductions instead of brakes and front tire. 3 out of 10. Next up, a Tacoma, and I'm not going to rate this. I'm confident that this is a copy of my own tune but without the street cage. Moving on, an S2 Class CLK, which is nicely optimized and the handling is great. Could use less camber and longer gears for some tracks, but there isn't much that could be done to improve it. 10 out of 10. The final tune is a Brabham with snow tires, which is less efficient than sport tires. The car has enough downforce for mid to high speed corners, but at lower speeds, the snow tires just let it down. Drag tires don't exactly perform better, but they cost a lot less, which allows for 200 extra horsepower. The tuning, however, is pretty good, and the car is stable and balanced. 6 out of 10. And it's over. Lost a couple of subscribers during that section, but it was worth it. A more detailed tuning guide will come out next month, which will address many things, including the common mistakes that people make. Here are the top 3 tuners that came out on top in these tests, so if you are looking for more variety, you can follow their creative hubs. Thanks for watching and goodbye.